4 wives. All vanished. No graves. No explanations. Just a crumbling mission chapel, an orchard where nothing grows, and a name that no one dares to say aloud. In the forgotten frontier town of Ashbridge Hollow, Kentucky, a respected churchman named Elias Whitmore married 4 women between 1852 and 1857. Each one disappeared under mysterious circumstances. No charges. No trials. Only ashes. What the town didn't know was that beneath the chapel, beneath the orchard, something older than faith was waiting, and Elias was feeding it. This is the true story, pieced together from sealed court records, burned journals, and forbidden church documents, of how one man's twisted theology turned a quiet seminary into a gate to something unspeakable. And it all begins with a single whispered question. What happened to Mr. Whitmore's 4 wives? On a bitter January morning in 1876, as the last snowstorm of the season receded over the Appalachian ridgelines of eastern Kentucky, 2 boys chasing a runaway hound made a discovery that would upend the quiet town of Ashbridge Hollow. The hound, a mutt named Butcher, had burrowed its way beneath the rotted foundation of the old St. Luke's parochial house, a long-abandoned rectory once attached to a Catholic mission school on the edge of the Whitmore estate. The building, more a skeletal relic than a home by then, had been left to decay for decades. Its steeple collapsed, the basement rumored to flood every spring. No one had entered the place since the war. Some claimed it was cursed, others merely said it stank. But the boys were persistent, and when they crawled down after Butcher, they emerged shaken and retching. Beneath the floorboards, behind a crumbling brick wall in the rectory cellar, they had found the remains. And not just one body. The discovery that shook Ashbridge. According to a yellowed article from the Ashbridge Weekly Patriot, dated February 4, 1876, the coroner counted 4 complete skeletons, all female, all approximately aged between 20 and 35. A rosary was clutched in the hand of one. Another had a shattered hip bone as if crushed. The skull of a third bore signs of trauma. The bones were remarkably well preserved, some still wrapped in remnants of muslin undergarments and lace-trimmed petticoats that hadn't seen sunlight since the 1850s. More disturbingly, initial forensic notes, which I obtained from the Kentucky Historical Society's restricted files, suggested that 2 of the bodies had been buried alive. This alone would have been enough to ignite the town's deepest fears. But it was the identity of the landowner that sent ripples through the community, and eventually, the nation. The property belonged to Elias Whitmore, a prominent industrialist, philanthropist, and devout Catholic convert, and the same man who had, in a span of 20 years, lost 4 wives under mysterious, but never criminally investigated circumstances. The charming Mr. Whitmore. Elias B. Whitmore arrived in Ashbridge Hollow in 1838, at just 24 years of age. A former medical apprentice turned railroad speculator, he quickly rose to local prominence by building mills, funding a schoolhouse, and founding the now-defunct St. Luke's Mission for Girls. His portraits depict a tall, clean-shaven man with the angular face of a preacher and the confident smile of a banker. He gave generously to the church, donating land and funds to the Carmelite sisters and hiring clergy from New York to oversee religious instruction. Yet behind the public devotion was a quieter, more unsettling rumor, that Whitmore had been married 4 times, and each wife had vanished or died unexpectedly before the age of 30. Here are the sparse details we've been able to confirm through marriage licenses, obituaries, and court dockets. Margaret O'Hara Whitmore, 1840 d. 1842 died of fever, though no physician signed the death certificate. Body buried at home under special family rites. Clara Bell Gantz Whitmore, 1843 d. 1846 accidental fall from the staircase of the Whitmore house. No coroner's report filed. Evelyn Coe Whitmore, 1847 d. 1850 declared missing. Last seen entering St. Luke's convent for a season of spiritual retreat. No official death record. Annette Gibbons Whitmore, 1851 d. 1856 died of consumption. Body allegedly buried in the Carmelite sisters' plot, though church records are inexplicably missing the entry. 4 wives. 4 deaths. No charges. No investigation, until the bones surfaced in 1876. A pattern emerges. I traveled to Ashbridge in March of this year, seeking local accounts from descendants and parish records. The town has changed, of course, now a patchwork of trailers and falling down barns. But the name Whitmore still clings to the air like smoke. There is a Whitmore Hollow Road. A Whitmore grain and timber sign, rusted nearly illegible. and a fading hand-painted marker outside the ruins of the seminary chapel that reads simply, St. Luke's, let the Lord keep the dead. I found an elderly woman, Mrs. Josephine Baird, who claimed her grandmother worked as a laundress for the seminary in the 1850s. She said the girls weren't right after going to that place, Josephine told me. She said they'd wake up screaming, bleeding from the nose sometimes, or sleepwalking in the chapel, chanting some awful song none of 'em knew. When I asked if the wives were ever seen at the seminary, Josephine paused. Evelyn, the third one, she was. That girl had something in her. Something holy or haunted, my granny said. Mr. Whitmore put her there after she lost her mind. But she weren't mad. She saw things. Told the sisters she had visions. Flames in the walls. A woman crying in the mirror. I tried to follow up on the seminary records from that era, but here's where the trail turns colder, or perhaps hotter depending on how you interpret things. In 1857, just 1 year after Annette's death, the entire St. Luke's compound burned to the ground. The cause was ruled electrical, though there were no known wiring systems installed. Several nuns perished in the fire. The few survivors, including a sister Carmela and a Father Benedict, vanished from public life shortly after, with no further mention in diocesan archives. The suppressed report. I managed to obtain a fragment of a suppressed legal report from Kentucky State Archives case file #1088-42, sealed in 1881 and only recently uncovered due to digitization efforts. The report included testimony from an anonymous former altar boy at St. Luke's, who recounted hearing a woman crying beneath the chapel during Holy Week services in 1855. He was told it was part of the Passion Play. But no Passion Play was recorded that year. The same report references a damp tunnel that led from the rectory cellar to beneath the altar itself, possibly the same passage in which the bones were found. One line in the deposition chilled me. They buried her with the rosary in her hand because she said he was coming for her. Not Christ. The other one. Where things stand. As of now, the bones recovered in 1876 remain stored in the Lexington Historical Evidence Vault. None have been formally identified, though dental and cranial comparisons strongly suggest the third skeleton may be Evelyn Coe Whitmore. The rosary clutched in her hand was traced to a limited set made by Carmelite nuns in New York in 1845. Only 12 exist, and one was gifted to Evelyn upon her marriage. There are more pieces to this puzzle. Too many, perhaps. Mr. Whitmore himself? He vanished in 1877 en route to a Catholic retreat in Ohio. The carriage was found overturned near the Ohio River. His body was never recovered. But what happened to his wives? And what was truly going on in the damp, haunted walls of St. Luke's? I intend to find out. In March 1877, 2 months after the skeletal remains were unearthed beneath St. Luke's, a leather-bound parcel was quietly transferred to the Diocese of Lexington's sealed archives. The sender was unnamed. The contents were not catalogued. It remained unopened for more than a century. It was only in 1991, during a structural renovation of the diocesan archives, that a part-time archivist named Mary Lou Radley, a woman with a fondness for rummaging through forgotten boxes with God inside them, as she put it, broke the seal. Inside were 11 letters, bound with twine and bearing the broken wax insignia of the Carmelite order. All were signed. Sister Carmela of the Cross. St. Luke's Mission, Ashbridge Hollow. Years, 1853 to 1856. And all were addressed to Reverend Mother Celestine. Carmelite Convent, Syracuse, New York. Fragments of a fractured mind. Or a warning. Let me be clear, the letters are erratic. They begin lucid and obedient, the sort of spiritual updates expected from a novice nun assigned to a frontier mission. But by letter 4 something changes. The grammar falters. The script becomes angular, uneven. And the content, well, that is what disturbs most. Here is an excerpt from letter 5, dated September 14, 1854. There is a woman in white who walks the garden at night. The other sisters won't speak of her. Her veil is torn. Her feet are bare. She weeps but makes no sound. I asked Sister Agnes if she saw her too. She won't meet my eyes anymore. I fear I've said something forbidden. But I know I am not mad. The woman in white. Other letters refer to her as the bleeding bride, or she who waits by the font. At least 2 letters suggest that this figure spoke to Sister Carmela, always during vigils, always in whispers from the chapel's east alcove. What's chilling is the consistency between these accounts and the reported visions of Evelyn Coe Whitmore, Elias's third wife, before her disappearance. Parish diary entries from 1850 describe Evelyn as seeing a pale woman in the chapel, dripping from the hem, whispering warnings about fire and betrayal. It raises the question. Was Evelyn seeing the same thing Sister Carmela did? And was this bride some spectral memory, or something conjured by the suffering within those stone walls? The symbol of the spiral. In letter 7, Sister Carmela includes a crude drawing of a spiral carved into the altar stone, not a decorative one but jagged and asymmetrical, with lines that veer inward too sharply. She writes, "I found the mark again. Third time this month. It bleeds sap when touched. Not wax. Not pitch. Sap that smells like iron. I caught Sister Miriam touching it while whispering prayers I did not recognize. They were not in Latin." This symbol appears elsewhere in the archives, once burned into the bottom of a hymn book recovered after the 1857 fire. Another time painted faintly in the Whitmore estate cellar, according to the 1876 sheriff's report. It appears again in a letter from a visiting priest dated 1855, who noted that some of the girls in the seminary scratched spirals into their arms with pins. I've spoken with Dr. Lena Moyer, a religious folklorist from the University of Pittsburgh, who specializes in Appalachian Catholic mysticism. She believes the spiral may represent a heretical doctrine, possibly imported by fringe mystics from French Canada in the early 1800s. These groups blended Marian worship with older, pre-Christian fertility rituals, often tied to blood and the harvest. Dr. Moyer's interpretation? The spiral is not a symbol of God's eternity. It is a trap, a maze, a calling toward the center, and what waits at the center is not divine. A secret room, a locked journal. Letter 9 hints at a hidden space beneath the convent's cloister. Sister Carmela describes hearing muffled cries at night, always during Lenten fasts, and once witnessing Father Benedict, the rector priest brought from New York, emerging from beneath the chapel floor with a velvet satchel and stained hands. He looked ill, pale as the Virgin statue in winter. When he saw me watching, he smiled too wide. "Some sins," he said, "must be kept close to God's house so he does not forget them." This Father Benedict appears repeatedly in diocesan letters from the period but abruptly disappears from records after the fire. No grave. No transfer order. No final rites logged. The last letter from Sister Carmela is barely coherent. It's undated and appears to have been written in haste, smeared with wax and what may be dried blood. In it she writes, "I have seen where he keeps her. Evelyn. She is still alive. Or was. Or is something else now. She sings without breath. The altar feeds her." And then a single chilling line. "He married all of them in that room." The marriage rites of St. Luke's. This may seem unthinkable, but a closer look at Whitmore's behavior and financial donations during his time in Ashbridge raises troubling possibilities. Records show that Elias Whitmore personally funded the remodeling of the chapel altar in 1849, the same year Evelyn was confined for her episodes. He also purchased a set of imported vestments for private nuptial rites, a line item buried in the church ledgers under special sacraments. Could he have been holding unauthorized marriage rituals in the hidden chamber below the altar? So, with whom officiating? And to what end? Epilogue to a letter never sent. The final page in the bundle was not a letter. It was a prayer. Handwritten and signed and different in tone, darker, less penitent. "O Holy Host, unbroken, unblessed. May this blood be received not by Christ but by the one buried beneath him. Grant that the veil may be lifted, the bride awakened, the union sealed. Let the chapel burn, but let the promise remain eternal. Amen." According to diocesan handwriting analysis, this prayer does not match Sister Carmela's previous letters. Whose hand wrote it? Father Benedict's? Elias Whitmore's? Or someone else entirely? Moving forward, I've reached out to the current custodians of the Whitmore estate, distant relatives now living in Ohio, and have secured permission to conduct a survey of the cellar beneath the estate's chapel ruins. Old plans suggest there may be sealed doors or bricked passages yet unexplored. In the next chapter, we'll look into the widow's journal of Annette Gibbons Whitmore, Elias's fourth and final wife, and whether she too suspected that something unholy lingered beneath St. Luke's. Until then, keep your lamps lit. When historians describe Annette Gibbons Whitmore, they usually say she was the quiet one. Unlike the first three wives of Elias Whitmore, each of whom left behind some trace, a letter, a court summons, a photograph, Annette seemed to vanish into her role as frontier wife with barely a ripple. She was only 19 when they wed in 1851. She died, or so we were told, in 1856 from consumption. No public funeral was held. No obituary was printed. And yet, by all accounts, Elias grieved deeply. Too deeply, perhaps. But last winter, in the attic of a crumbling farmhouse outside of Glencoe, Kentucky, a private collector named Carter Dane stumbled upon something extraordinary in an old cedar trunk sold at auction. A velvet-wrapped booklet, its pages stiff with age, filled with the steady, looping script of a woman chronicling her descent into dread. At the top of the first page, she'd written in pressed ink, "Ledger of my final year AGW, 1855. A voice emerges from the grave. The contents of this ledger, part diary, part confession, read not like the outpourings of a mad woman, but the methodical notes of someone trying to survive something she couldn't name. Each entry is dated. Each begins with a scripture verse, often ironic in tone. But it is what lies between the lines that chills. Take, for example, this passage from April 3, 1855. The sisters at St. Luke's chant after sundown. I heard them while walking back from the orchard. The hymn was in Latin, but the cadence was wrong. Backwards almost, not mass-like. I felt it in my teeth. A week later she writes, Elias prayed with me last night, but it was not a prayer I recognized. He held my hand over a basin filled with ash and placed my ring inside. He said the true wedding would come soon beneath the altar. If these were the only entries, one might write them off as the poetic mourning of a lonely wife. But Annette's observations become increasingly grounded, precise, almost investigative. She sketches floor plans of the chapel, diagrams the strange creaking in the night, and even draws the spiral symbol, the same jagged, lopsided spiral seen in Sister Carmela's letters and on the rosary found with Evelyn's remains. On May 19th, she reports finding one of Elias's ledgers locked in the false drawer of his desk. The entries were coded, but she copied what she could. May 12th, she bleeds still. The vision deepens. Bespoke the name again. It echoed beneath the cistern. June 1st, 3 rings returned. 1 remains. 3 rings. 1 remains. 3 wives. 1 left. The ritual of 4. It is here, midway through the ledger, that the tone shifts from uneasy observation to abject terror. Annette begins to suspect, and then outright assert, that Elias's wives were never meant to live. That each one served a purpose, a bride, in a sacrament not recognized by any Christian rite. She believes she was chosen as the final piece. He calls it a binding. 4 corners. 4 brides. 4 deaths to seal the vow. Each of us a door. And when the 4th is closed, the veil will part and he will be visible. Who he is remains maddeningly vague, referred to only as the groom beneath, or once as the Vespers husband. In this twisted theology, Elias is not the bridegroom, but a priest officiating something older, darker. Later entries reveal that Elias spent long nights beneath the chapel. Annette writes of hearing murmurs from the cellar and once waking to find ashes arranged in concentric circles around their bed. He says I am not ready yet, that my body must agree to the folding. He places his hand on my stomach and whispers the same prayer over and over. I don't think it is Latin anymore. Annette's escape or capture. The final entry in the ledger is dated September 11, 1856, just days before her supposed death. I found the trapdoor in the chapel. It leads not down but inward, through the old ossuary. He says we must be wed by blood. I have stolen laudanum. If you find this, know that I tried to leave. Annette's death certificate claims she died of tuberculosis in the Whitmore house. Yet no one alive can remember seeing her body. No priest signed the burial rites. No grave was ever consecrated. We now suspect, based on spatial analysis and new ground-penetrating radar scans taken last spring, that the Whitmore Estate Chapel contains a sealed subchamber beneath the eastern wall, not marked on any official plan. A cavity approximately 6 feet by 10, reinforced with stone and lined in oak. Could this be where Annette was taken? Could this be the chamber described by Sister Carmela? The one where Evelyn was wed without breath? And if so, what exactly was sealed inside? The bridal theory. Modern scholars and fringe theologians have begun to refer to this entire framework as the bridal theory, a speculative spiritual cult surrounding Elias Whitmore. According to this theory, Whitmore did not simply kill his wives. He used them, symbolically and perhaps supernaturally, in a ritual designed to unveil or conjure a hidden entity, believed to dwell beneath or within sacred structures. Dr. Lena Moyer, the folklorist introduced earlier, puts it this way. We've seen similar heresies before, in isolated convents in Spain, hidden mystic sects in Poland, even among remote Protestant groups in 1830s Appalachia. But this is the first American case where the symbol, the pattern of deaths, and the architecture itself point to a deliberate supernatural structure. a blood ritual masquerading as Catholic piety, a mysterious wax figure. I must also mention a strange epilogue to the ledger's rediscovery. Inside the same cedar trunk, tucked in a compartment beneath the false bottom, was a small wax effigy of a woman in bridal lace, faceless, with a spiral carved into the chest. The figure had pins driven into its sides and one leg was snapped. It now resides in a climate-controlled drawer at the University of Kentucky Folklore Collection, labeled only as Whitmore Artifact Number 3, Possible Bride Doll. Provenance uncertain. Handle with gloves. Conclusion, for now. Annette's ledger is not just a record of fear. It's a warning. It confirms that the events at St. Luke's and the Whitmore estate were not random, not merely tragic. They were ritualized, calculated, part of something ancient and deliberately hidden under the veil of faith. The four wives were not the victims of neglect, madness, or circumstance. They were sacrifices. And what, or who, they were sacrificed to may yet linger in the dark soil of Ashbridge Hollow. In the next chapter, we'll examine the missing parish census from 1855 and the strange fate of the choir girls who vanished from St. Luke's that same year. By now, the image is grimly clear. 4 wives dead, vanished, or buried alive beneath the soil of a Catholic mission funded by one of the wealthiest men in pre-war Kentucky. But Elias Whitmore's darkness did not end with the women he married. It extended to the girls he educated. In early spring 1855, just months before Annette Gibbons Whitmore vanished, the St. Luke's Mission School reported an unusual drop in enrollment. Church records filed with the Carmelite Regional Mother House list 12 resident pupils enrolled in the convent's boarding school at the start of the year. By autumn, 5 were no longer listed. No obituaries. No transfer records. No names on regional school registries. Simply gone. No public statement was made. No notices appeared in the Ashbridge Weekly Patriot. And no investigation was ever conducted. Until now. The missing census. I learned of this mystery while combing through the Lexington Diocese annual parish census, a thick leather-bound tome preserved in the archives. The entries are neatly ordered, with school and mission attendance broken down year by year. Except for 1855. Where the column should read 12 girls, it had been scraped clean, the parchment physically scraped as if by knife. A ghostly indent remained, just enough to make out a faint 7. Thanks to multispectral imaging performed by Dr. Miriam Hurst at the University of Louisville, we were able to reconstruct the original figure. 12 girls residing was altered to 7 girls remaining. And scrawled faintly in red iron gall ink beneath the original tally was a single cryptic phrase. They went to the groom. Eyewitness accounts silenced. Surviving witness testimony is scant. Most of the nuns who served at St. Luke's perished in the 1857 fire, or, like Sister Carmela, disappeared before it. However, in a sealed transcript dated 1901, an elderly nun named Sister Noreen, living in a Benedictine retirement home in Maryland, gave a final interview to a diocesan visitor. The transcript, long buried in private church archives, reads in part, "The girls were afraid of the Vesper bells. One by one they were summoned to special choir practice after dusk. But no one heard singing. Evelyn came once, pale as a shroud. She sat in the rear pew and watched them practice. Her lips moved, but she sang no words. The last time I saw little Lottie Green, she was in her nightgown, barefoot, walking across the garden toward the chapel. She didn't blink when I called her. Just smiled." Lottie Green, aged 9, is not listed in any cemetery in Ashbridge County. Nor do any Green family descendants recall her burial. There are 5 such girls. Lottie Green 9. Mary Wicklow 11. Alice Singer 13. Emma Lyle 12. Therese Belmont 10. Each a choir girl. Each vanished in 1855. None accounted for. The song with no melody. From the recovered notes of Sister Carmela, referenced in Chapter 2, we know she described a strange, tuneless chant the girls began repeating in the weeks before their disappearances. One particularly harrowing passage reads, "It has no melody. It rises and falls like breath. The girls hum it as they clean, as they walk, as they sleep. I found Therese one night with her hands clasped around a doll and her lips moving. But the sound was coming from the floor." This chant, referred to in the ledger as the bridal hymn, included repeated invocations of something Sister Carmela could not translate. A strange syllable. Marvaneth. This name, or word, appears nowhere in Latin liturgy or known occult texts, but it recurs in several documents related to Elias Whitmore. In one sermon outline discovered among his personal effects, preserved in the private collection of a distant relative, He notes. The fourth must offer the name before the veil parts. Marveneth, Marveneth, carve it with ash. We still don't know what the phrase means. But it clearly held power in whatever ritual or doctrine Whitmore was developing, or channeling. A strange altered discovery. During my field visit to the ruins of St. Luke's, now little more than a stone foundation swallowed by ivy and dirt, I met with local historian Kenneth Bray, who had helped lead a 1986 amateur excavation of the site. He showed me a broken fragment of altar stone, unearthed beneath the old chapel nave. Etched into its underside were 12 small circles, 5 of them blackened with soot. We thought maybe it was some kind of votive holder or symbolic carving, Bray said. But after your research, well, you tell me. 12 girls. 5 vanished. 5 burnt circles. 7 untouched. Rumors of a vigil in white. Local folklore in Ashbridge Hollow has long circulated ghost stories of a white procession, girls in veils, seen wandering the woods behind the old mission during foggy autumn nights. These stories were usually dismissed as backwoods superstition or the invention of children. But an 1892 letter written by schoolteacher Miss Eloise March, employed in the area, adds unsettling detail. They came to the edge of the trees just before dusk, little girls in gowns. Silent. I thought it was a prank at first, but when I called out they didn't move. Just stared. And then all at once they turned and walked back into the trees. Miss March left her position 3 weeks later, citing unsettling disturbances. The theory of a living altar. One of the most disturbing interpretations comes from Professor Arnold Beck, an esoteric theology researcher at Oberlin College. According to Beck, if Whitmore's ritual required the union of 4 wives to seal a gate, the 5 vanished girls may have functioned as bridal witnesses, innocent sacrificed to reinforce or empower the rite. This would not be unique. Similar patterns exist in Germanic blood marriage rites where children serve as spiritual anchors. It's horrifying, and yet, increasingly plausible. Because the timing aligns. Because their disappearances were covered up. And because every one of these girls was part of the choir, and may have unwittingly sung something that summoned what Whitmore believed dwelled beneath the altar. A whisper from the ground. I'll end this chapter with a personal note. During my last visit to Ashbridge Hollow while recording ambient audio at dusk, a colleague of mine, sound technician Laura Weathers, captured a strange phenomenon. At exactly 6:17 p.m., her microphone picked up a faint melody, low and breathy, rising out of what appeared to be silence. When isolated and enhanced, the recording revealed what sounds like 5 distinct childlike voices humming in harmony. The pattern repeats every 47 seconds. It contains no identifiable musical structure. We sent the clip to audio experts at Penn State. Their reply? Whatever this is, it's not an environmental anomaly. It sounds deliberate. Up next, Chapter 5, The Disappearance of Father Benedict. Was Whitmore acting alone? Or was someone in the church helping him orchestrate these rituals? The fall of the elusive Father Benedict may hold the key. In any investigation of religious abuse or occult practice cloaked in the veil of piety, we must ask, did anyone else know? Were these horrors the work of a single man, Elias Whitmore, disturbed and powerful? Or did others, particularly within the church, aid or allow them? One name comes up again and again in survivor accounts, lost ledgers and oral history. Father Silas Benedict. The priest in black who arrived from New York in 1852. The man who oversaw every private marriage of Elias Whitmore. The man who vanished without a trace 1 week before the fire that destroyed St. Luke's mission in 1857. A priest without a past. Officially, there is no priest by the name of Father Benedict in the Carmelite orders or Jesuit registers between 1845 and 1860. And yet, beginning in 1852, multiple parish documents from Ashbridge Hollow, including communion logs, offertory tallies and school confirmations, are signed Father S. Benedict in dark blue ink, always in the same curling antique hand. The signature appears alongside Whitmore's, particularly in documents involving property deeds, mission expansions and, most tellingly, the chapel renovations that introduced a sealed subchamber beneath the altar. Why would a man so involved with the Whitmore family leave no record in broader Catholic history? The answer may lie in a set of cloistered correspondences stored in the Jesuit archives at Fordham University. 5 letters dated 1851 to 1856, written from Father D. Moretti in Syracuse to the Archdiocese in St. Louis. Letter 3, dated October 1853, includes the line, "I regret sending Brother Benedict into the hills. He is no longer our man. He speaks of marriage rites and blood offerings. He claims to have seen the groom. I suspect he no longer serves our God. The Whitmore marriage papers. We have mentioned before that Elias Whitmore married 4 women under increasingly secretive circumstances. But it wasn't until I located a crumbling storage box in the Lexington Chancery marked Annulments, 19th Century Disputes, that I found something explosive. Tucked between petitions from long-forgotten frontier parishes were copies of nuptial permissions signed by Father Benedict for each of Whitmore's 4 wives. Except these weren't typical marriage blessings. Each paper included a Latin phrase not recognized by any Roman sacrament. In Nox Spiralis Vincula Nuptiarum Sancta. In the spiral of night, the sacred bonds of marriage. Beneath each line was a list of offerings. Blood from the bride's thumb. Ash from consecrated pine. 1 recitation of the bridal prayer. And then the most damning line. The groom need not be present, for he is already beneath. The ritualized role of Father Benedict. A pattern emerges. Benedict was more than a priest. He was the ritual master. Accounts from surviving letters, including one by Annette Gibbons Whitmore, suggest that Father Benedict conducted night masses with no congregation, lit candles shaped like veiled women, and anointed the altar stone with oil that smelled like rust. One letter from Sister Carmela describes witnessing Benedict entering the confession booth with a wooden casket, whispering to it as if it could answer. More bizarrely, in June 1855, he gave a sermon that, according to a parishioner's notebook, contained no scripture, only a repeated phrase. She is the veil. She is the veil. Lift her, and you will see the face of God. This sermon occurred just days before 3 choir girls vanished. A black mass in white robes? Folk testimony collected in the 1940s from elderly residents of Ashbridge Hollow hints at something even darker. One Mr. Caleb Duras, who was 12 years old in 1856, told a WPA field researcher, "Father Benedict weren't right. He wore white robes with black rings stitched on him. One night I saw smoke comin' from the church, but no bell was ringin'. When I got close I saw girls walkin' in circles. And him, kneelin' in the dirt, speakin' backwards." Was this memory accurate? Or a boy's dream warped by time? It lines up disturbingly well with other accounts of reversed hymns, girls marking themselves, and strange ceremonies held beneath the Vesper bell. The final mass in the fire. Then comes the fire, the sudden, total inferno that consumed the St. Luke's compound in March 1857. The blaze was blamed on faulty hearthstone construction, despite a lack of fuel residue. Survivors were few. But one record, preserved in the Ashbridge County Courthouse under accidental deaths, lists the last people seen entering the mission before the fire. Sister Miriam, Sister Agnes, 2 unidentified children, Father Silas Benedict. None were ever seen again. And yet, no body matching Benedict's description was found. No ashes with a priest's collar. No dental remains. Nothing. Gone. As if erased. A handwritten warning. Among the charred artifacts retrieved from the ruins was a brass-bound book believed to be Father Benedict's personal devotional. Its pages were water-damaged and burned, but one survived, singed but legible. On it, in the same angular script as the forbidden marriage rites, was scrawled, "It is done. The 4th is sealed. He stirs." This page now sits under glass at the Kentucky Historical Archive in Lexington. Visitors rarely notice it. Fewer still understand what it might mean. The door in the ground. If Father Benedict did not die in the fire, where did he go? And what did he see beneath the chapel floor? Dr. Lena Moyer has a theory. Benedict believed he had opened something. The groom, whatever or whoever that is, was not a metaphor. It was an entity, or an intelligence. The rites weren't just symbolic. They were literal steps toward inviting something into our world. And when Annette, the 4th, was given, he believed the door had opened. His job was complete. Which may be why he vanished, or was taken. Conclusion. Father Silas Benedict was no ordinary priest. Whether he was corrupted, coerced, or already serving some secret order before his arrival, the records paint a damning portrait of a man facilitating dark rites under the guise of Catholic devotion. He baptized no known children. He left no sermon transcripts. And yet he married 4 women in secret, oversaw the choir practices from which girls vanished, and sealed the final rites just days before the mission burned to the ground. The church has no explanation. But Ashbridge remembers. And the spiral beneath the altar, that symbol carved into stone and skin, suggests that whatever he helped awaken, it was never truly put to rest. Ashbridge Hollow had long faded into a ghost town by the early 20th century, a place of broken steeples and rumor-thick air, visited only by the occasional drifter or obsessive historian. But in the summer of 1973, a discovery was made that pulled the town, and its buried horrors, violently back into public consciousness. That July, a local boy named Caleb Givens, along with his older cousin Matthew, were playing in what remained of the Whitmore family orchard, a rotting grove of crabapple trees that had largely succumbed to disease and time. Caleb tripped on what he thought was a tree root. It was a stone. Flat, oval, with something carved deep into its moss-covered face. A spiral. Jagged. Uneven. The same spiral reported in the letters of Sister Carmela. The same spiral carved into the Whitmore altar. When they pried it loose with a rusted trowel, they found something far worse beneath it. Human bones. The Ashbridge Orchard Site, 1973 police report. The Ashbridge County Sheriff's Office opened a formal investigation, which was later sealed by court order, citing archaeological preservation concerns. However, a retired deputy, Tom Rayleigh, shared notes with me in confidence. Among his scribbled field reports: partial skeletal remains, one adult female. Missing left hand. Skull intact but no teeth. Wrist bone showed notching. Possibly bound. Circle of 6 stones surrounding burial site, each marked with symbol, some kind of altar? The spiral stone now resides in the University of Kentucky Occult Symbol Archive, tagged as an unclassified ritual marker, though the public-facing description downplays its origin. Privately, one researcher I spoke to described it as the clearest physical confirmation that Whitmore's rites extended beyond the chapel. Strange behavior at the Givens home. Following the discovery, the Givens family reported several weeks of paranormal activity that began escalating with increasing severity. Caleb reportedly spoke in his sleep, reciting Latin phrases. The family dog refused to enter the orchard again, instead growling and barking at it nightly. Windows would be found open in the mornings despite being locked. The youngest daughter, Lily, was found one morning asleep beneath the kitchen table, her fingernails filled with dirt, clutching a blackened pine twig. They eventually left the property. Caleb, now in his 50s and working as a forest ranger, told me during a recent interview, "That spiral, it got in your head. After we dug it up, I'd see it in frost on the window, in knots of tree bark, once in the dust on my mirror. You don't forget a shape like that." The spiral theory. At this point in the investigation, the spiral, once an unsettling footnote, had become the thread stitching everything together. Every wife's final days. Every vanishing choir girl. Even Father Benedict's sermons. Dr. Lena Moyer, ever cautious in her conclusions, now refers to the spiral as not just a symbol, a map, a diagram of invocation. Spirals have long represented movement, inward, downward, toward origin or entity. In Whitmore's theology, they weren't meditative. They were instructions. The orchard spiral was the largest physical one discovered to date. Measuring nearly 2 feet across and 6 inches deep, it had been hand-carved into river slate, dragged there at great effort. Some believe it may mark a ritual site, perhaps even where one of the brides, or one of the girls, was originally buried. The Gospel of the Ground. In 1981, independent researcher and local mystic Merritt Holloway self-published a short, rambling monograph titled The Gospel of the Ground, Whitmore's Hidden Faith. Though largely dismissed as fringe speculation, it contains one passage that has since gained traction among occult historians. The orchard was not planted for fruit. It was planted to feed the earth. The roots were meant to wrap the buried and sing the rites upward. When the trees died, so did the silence. That phrase, "sing the rites upward," aligns disturbingly well with Sister Carmela's letters, particularly her reference to songs that come from below the floorboards, and the 1973 audio recordings, referenced in Chapter 4, of what sounds like children humming beneath the soil. Were the trees ritual conduits? Were they planted above the buried? What kind of religion was Elias Whitmore building? A new burial? One final note. In 2022, a group of graduate students from the University of Louisville conducted a ground-penetrating radar (GPR) scan of the old orchard, part of a folklore studies project. I obtained their data through a Freedom of Information Act request. The results were terrifying. The scan revealed 6 distinct burial cavities, spaced in a near-perfect spiral, radiating out from the 1973 discovery site. One cavity had already been disturbed, that was the Givens stone. But 5 remained sealed. And perhaps most disturbingly, a 7th cavity, at the center of the spiral, shows signs of recent subsidence, suggesting movement underground. None of the students have returned to the site. One withdrew from the university weeks later. No reason given. The spiral lives. There's a temptation to rationalize all this. To say it's metaphor. Madness. The paranoia of the religious frontier. But the evidence now spans 170 years. From the whispered chants of 1855 to a boy's nightmares in 1973. From the blood marriage rites of Whitmore to stone spirals buried beneath crabapple roots. Something was, and perhaps still is, alive beneath Ashbridge Hollow. And the orchard? It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a skin stretched over something buried alive. In the fall of 1997, a private estate in Chillicothe, Ohio, auctioned off a number of items once belonging to Jonathan Whitmore, great-nephew of Elias Whitmore. Among the lots was a leather-bound Douay-Rheims Bible, bearing the gold-pressed inscription, "To E.W., in the Vale we wait." What made this find extraordinary wasn't just its provenance, but what lay hidden inside. Pressed between the pages of Leviticus and Revelation were 7 sheets of thick, rough parchment, handwritten in black ink, dated 1856 and titled, "On the Veil and the Union Beyond Flesh, a Sermon for the Sealing of the Fourth." Scholars have since dubbed it the Black Veil Sermon. This document, perhaps more than any other, reveals Elias Whitmore's personal doctrine, a fusion of corrupted Catholic rites, misappropriated scripture, and something entirely inhuman. Excerpts from the Black Veil Sermon. The language is precise, almost hypnotic. Here are select passages. "We are not wed as man to woman, but as dust to divinity. The veil is the bride. The bride is the gate. And beyond her veil is the hollow of eternal breath. To love the groom is to enter silence. He does not speak, for his words would crack the world. The fourth must not resist. She must be opened in prayer and in ash. The spiral is her crown. The veil is her womb. There will be a fire. It is part of the sealing. Let the chapel burn. Let the altar collapse. But the vow will remain eternal." This was no metaphor. Whitmore wasn't speaking symbolically. He believed, or claimed to believe, that through ritual sacrifice, each of his 4 wives served as a veil, and through their deaths, something beyond death could be glimpsed. But what truly horrified me was this line. "The veil shall sing. The youngest first. Then the others. And at last the bride shall bleed the name. Marvaneth." A theology of possession. Whitmore's sermon outlines a deliberate inversion of Catholic theology. Where traditional doctrine teaches that Christ is the bridegroom and the church is the bride, Whitmore rewrites it entirely. The groom is not Christ. The groom is something beneath. The veil is not symbolic purity, but a layer of flesh that must be removed. Marriage is not union, it is invocation. He saw his 4 wives, Sarah, Evelyn, Margaret, and Annette, not as beloved partners but as vessels, each one preparing the next. The first 3, by his logic, softened the veil. The 4th? Opened it. The whispered marriage rites. Cross-referencing the sermon with Annette's ledger, chapter 3, and Sister Carmela's letters, chapter 2, we now believe that each of Whitmore's marriages was performed in secret, beneath the chapel, with Father Benedict presiding and, crucially, without the wife's full consent. Annette's final entry confirms. "He said the veil had thinned, that I must speak the name aloud. I refused. He cut his hand and pressed it to my lips." Other records suggest that the marriage rites involved the burning of wedding veils in consecrated oil, anointing the altar with mixed blood, recitation of a non-canonical bridal gospel, included in fragments in the sermon pages. One such fragment reads, "And she knelt in the hollow, and the groom took no breath, for he had never breathed. And still he stirred." The last Mass at St. Luke's. The Black Veil Sermon was never delivered publicly. But Sister Noreen, chapter 4, claimed that on the night before the fire, a Mass was held beneath the chapel, one which the surviving nuns were not invited to. "I saw white veils hanging from the rafters. The girls had sewn them for practice. But there were 5 veils and 4 candles. They were not singing hymns. They were humming, like breath pulled backward." It's widely believed that this last Mass was the completion of the 4th marriage, the sealing of Annette. Within 12 hours the mission was reduced to ash. Let her sleep until the door opens. At the bottom of the final sermon page, written in a different ink, shakier and in smaller hand, is a chilling note. "Let her sleep beneath the orchard. Let the groom wait beneath the hollow. The veil will open when the hymn is heard again." This handwriting does not match Whitmore's. Handwriting analysis suggests it was added later, possibly by Father Benedict. Does this suggest the ritual failed? Or merely that it is not yet complete? Remember, in chapter 6, we learned that 5 burial sites remain sealed beneath the Whitmore orchard. And the 7th cavity at the spiral's center shows signs of recent movement. Whitmore's obsession with veils. Newly uncovered Whitmore family correspondence includes a letter from Elias to his cousin, dated December 1854. I have ordered new lace from Vienna. The 4th veil must be perfect. Hand-woven, ash-colored, the hem unfinished. She must wear it before the hymns begin. No one must see her face. Historically, black or gray veils were worn by widows or nuns. But Annette was neither. Yet in a sketch preserved with her journal, she draws herself in profile, wearing a veil that trails to the floor, with something reaching up from beneath it, a shadow shaped like a hand. The Gospel of the Veil. In a draft homily found among the sermon pages, Whitmore writes, "The veil is the sky. The veil is the mind. The veil is the womb. To pierce it is to see eternity unblinking." Religious scholars I've consulted describe this as Gnostic inversion. The idea that the physical world is a prison and that truth lies in piercing through it by sacramental transgression. But Whitmore's version wasn't metaphorical. He believed in a literal veil beneath the altar, and that with the right rites, enough blood, the proper chant, the proper bride, it could be torn. And what would come through? No one is willing to say. Conclusion. The Black Veil Sermon reframes this entire story. This was never just a frontier horror or a tale of 4 vanished wives. It was a constructed theology carried out in secret, passed between a wealthy man and a rogue priest, and enacted on human lives. A doctrine of veils and hymns, of spirals and silence, of girls who vanished, brides who bled, and a groom who never breathed. And if the final words of the sermon are to be believed, then the ritual was not intended to end in 1857. It was meant to sleep, until someone digs too deep, or sings the hymn again. It began with a simple inconsistency. While reviewing the baptismal records of St. Luke's Mission 1852 to 1857, in the Lexington Diocese Archives, I came across a short entry under Spring Confirmations 1856. The page listed 4 children baptized on March 19, all under the age of 7. But when I compared that list to Ashbridge Hollow's census from the same year, none of the names matched any known families in the area. Delilah R., age 5. Thomas L., age 4. Beatrice C., age 6. Silas, no surname, age unknown. No parents were listed. No sponsors. Just a cryptic note in the margin, scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting. Ash prepared. Veil touched. Hymn hums. The entry had been scratched over, but the indentations were still legible under raking light. I wasn't the first to notice. A 1979 internal memo from the Diocesan Preservation Committee referenced these names, along with a single question. Were these baptisms real? The river that ran black. Traditional baptisms in Ashbridge Hollow took place at St. Luke's Spring, a clear water stream fed from limestone underground. The parish ledgers even celebrated it as a miraculous spring of purity, citing several healings following immersion. But a letter preserved in the diary of Sister Agnes, one of the nuns who died in the 1857 fire, paints a darker picture. The water has not been used in weeks. Father Benedict claims it has grown, clouded by the veil. He ordered ashes be taken from the altar and scattered in the basin by the east pew. He says the groom prefers silence to flow. It was from this ash basin, not the spring, that the 4 unnamed children were reportedly baptized. A different kind of baptism. I spoke with Dr. Corinne Silva, a theologian at Seton Hall who specializes in deviant Christian sects and sacramental inversion. After examining the baptism entries in Sister Agnes's writings, she proposed something chilling. These weren't baptisms in the traditional sense. They were reversals. Not into the church but out of it. An unbaptism. A spiritual dedication, not to Christ, but to the thing Whitmore and Benedict believed awaited beneath the veil. This lines up with Father Benedict's notes from his forbidden rites, referenced in chapter 5, which included, the child must be named again, washed in ash, and silence must be sealed behind the lips. Were these children offered, marked, or simply made to forget? The forgotten children. I dug deeper into the fate of those 4 names. Delilah R., no grave, no marriage records. Thomas L., not listed in any school ledger. Beatrice C., possible match with a Beatrice Clemens who died at age 8 in a fire, in 1857, the same day St. Luke's burned. Silas, no surname, never found again. One letter, however, may provide a clue. Found in a private collection held by the descendant of an Ashbridge midwife, the letter is addressed to Sister E., and dated October 1856. The boy is not right. He does not sleep. He does not blink. He sits by the stone basin and hums the same tune the others sing in their dreams. Please come quickly. Was this the child named Silas? And what was the same tune? It appears again and again. A melody with no melody. A hymn without words. The chapel wall scribbles. During a structural survey of the ruined St. Luke's site in 1989, researchers from Western Kentucky University discovered charcoal markings on the inside of the collapsed eastern wall, faint, but visible in infrared photography. They included crude drawings of human figures all kneeling, a spiral encircling a central figure with no face, and 5 repeated symbols believed to be names. B. And the 5th possibly added later. Were these drawn by children? Witnesses? Victims? No one knows. But a forensic handwriting analyst concluded that the characters were likely written by at least 3 separate hands, all under the age of 10. The Esschlicht vision. Among the strangest pieces of evidence came not from documents, but from an 1871 interview with Sister Gertrude, a Carmelite nun who fled Ashbridge shortly before the fire. She was questioned as part of a church-led inquiry that was later suppressed. Her testimony, rediscovered in 2016, contains a vivid account. The children were made to kneel in the cold ash. They weren't clothed in white but black. No prayers were spoken aloud. Only humming. The boy, Silas, looked at me when he rose. His lips were gray. Not with ash, but as if the color had been taken from him. I do not believe he was alive as we understand it. Sister Gertrude was transferred to a monastery in Ohio the following year. She never spoke of Ashbridge again. A second type of spiral. One last anomaly. In the university GPR scans of the Whitmore orchard, see Chapter 6, researchers noted 2 spiral arrangements. One large with burial cavities and another smaller, roughly child-sized, located 30 feet to the north. In the center of that second spiral, a stone bowl. It contained traces of ash, lye, and a small cross-shaped carving in the bottom. No known religious symbol matches it. But when compared to sketches in Whitmore's Marginalia, it bears resemblance to what he called the first mouth, from which the groom drinks. The truth of the baptized. It's now difficult, if not impossible, to view the St. Luke's baptisms as sacred. At best, they were twisted reinterpretations of holy sacraments. At worst, they were markings, preparations, dedicatory rites offered to something ancient and watching. A groom beneath the veil, waiting to be fed by hymns born in children's mouths. Of the 4 children named in the 1856 ledger, only one, Beatrice C., appears in public death records. The others remain unaccounted for. But the whispers persist. Hikers near the orchard report hearing low voices at dusk, like children praying with their heads underwater. Conclusion. If Whitmore's marriages were about piercing the veil, the baptisms may have been its fortification, a kind of spiritual anchoring that kept the gate from fully closing. Children in his theology were not innocents. They were keys. The name had been whispering through the story since the beginning. Marvana. It first appeared in Whitmore's sermon, Chapter 7, again in the margin of Father Benedict's journal, and was reportedly muttered by one of the ash-baptized children in her sleep. We assumed it was a name. But Dr. Moyer proposed something more ominous. It is not a name. It's a sound. A signal. A verbal key that opens a particular thought. A wordless shape in the mind that can't be unthought once spoken. A phonetic spiral. We consulted linguistic anthropologist Dr. Ruben Gala, who specializes in pre-Christian apotropaic language forms. His analysis. Marvaneth is not language in the traditional sense. It carries phonemic markers that resemble Proto-Semitic invocation patterns, but distorted, bent in on themselves like a voice through water. It is not meant to be said aloud. Naturally, we had to ask, what was it summoning? The shape in the dirt. In 2005, a University of Kentucky archaeology grad named Elise Heron led an unauthorized dig at the edge of the former Whitmore orchard. She and her team used GPR to map what they believed were child-sized burial spirals, see Chapter 6. But what they found was something worse. At approximately 7 feet underground, they uncovered a chamber, built of stone and braced with hand-forged nails. There was no door, just a spiral ramp carved into the earth leading down. Inside was a slab. And on the slab, a mummified figure curled in a fetal position covered in ash. Elise's full report was never published. The university denied the dig's existence. But a leaked photograph from a former research assistant reached our team. The figure was not a child. It measured nearly 7 feet long. The arms were crossed over the face, and around its throat was a blackened wedding veil, decayed but still intact. The face that wasn't. Here's where it becomes almost unspeakable. According to notes smuggled out by a member of the dig team, when they tried to lift the veil from the figure's face, the assistant who touched it collapsed, seizing violently. He later told paramedics. It didn't have a face. Just movement. Like folds in skin that led inward forever. He was institutionalized days later. 1 year after the dig, Elise Heron disappeared. Her car was found near the Ashbridge Cliffs. Engine cold. He's missing. Driver's door wide open. Inside the vehicle, police found her field notebook. The final page reads, "He was never meant to breathe, but she kissed him anyway." The sound in the earth. There were always stories, going back generations, of people hearing things beneath the orchard. Murmurs. Wet, rattling breaths. Humming without harmony. But in 2020, an experiment was conducted by amateur paranormal researcher Harlan Cruz, who lowered a contact microphone into a collapsed well near the old orchard perimeter. He recorded 3 hours of ambient sound. After digital enhancement, he isolated a rhythmic pulsing, not unlike a human heartbeat. Every 47 seconds, a second tone appeared, like a breath drawn through water. The waveform, when visualized, resembled a spiral. The groom's ritual purpose. Everything we've uncovered points to a singular goal behind Whitmore's marriages, the ash baptisms, and the construction of the orchard spirals. To give shape to the groom. Not summon but build. Piece by piece. Through flesh, vow, hymn, and silence. Each wife was a veil. Each child, a chime in the hymn. Each ash basin, a mouth in the dirt. And when the last veil was torn, when Annette screamed his name in the burning chapel, something slipped through. Sister Carmela's warning. Her final letter, addressed to the church in Baltimore, was intercepted, never mailed. It ends with these words. He sleeps now below the orchard. The groom waits not for love but for silence. If they sing again, if the fifth girl is found, the veil will burn backwards. Do not dig. Do not pray for him. Do not let the veil lift. No one knows what she meant by the fifth girl. But given what we now know about the 5 burial cavities in the spiral, chapter 6, it's possible one was never filled. Was someone spared? Hidden? Still out there? Or worse, was the fifth girl never human at all? The modern echoes. Over the past 3 decades, Ashbridge Hollow has remained abandoned, but reports have not stopped. In 1999, hikers claimed to see a woman in a black veil standing in the orchard at dusk, and vanishing behind a dead tree. In 2011, a child went missing on a scouting trip nearby. He was found the next morning in a collapsed grave repeating the phrase, "He has no face but he sees." And in 2023, a group of amateur ghost hunters live-streamed from the orchard site. Their audio feed captured a woman's voice, barely audible, whispering the words, "Marvan F." They deleted the video the next day. Conclusion. The groom beneath is not folklore. He is the product of ritual, silence, and belief, fed by decades of sacrifice, disguised as sacrament. He is not a man. Not a ghost. Not a demon. He is a shape with no surface, waiting where breath dies and hymns fall still. Elias Whitmore was not insane. He was precise. And we may never know if he succeeded fully, or merely cracked the veil enough to let something lean through. But the orchard remains. And beneath its rotted roots, something breathes.